Hey everyone, welcome back to the Beat Your Genes podcast. This is episode number 343, part two. So we're going to go straight into Dr. Lyle's answer for the second part of last episode.
One more question,
No, I
just for
think,
fun.
okay. Dear Dr. Lyle, I understand that the very basis of natural selection is transmission and expression of genes. Basically, we're all evolved to pass as many of our successful genes into the population, and that the characteristics and behavior of the organism is evolved to promote this goal. However, how does that explain the persistent existence of gay people? Their behavior does not work to pass genes into the population. In fact, it seems to be quite the opposite. I've heard this expressed as a Darwinian paradox. Is there other behaviors that are also Darwinian paradox? By the way, this listener says, I'm gay, and this is no way intended to imply that homosexuality is an aberration.
Um, it's uh, there. I'm not sure that we know the answer, but we certainly have. Um, there could be. Let's first talk about answers in principle. So the very first thing that we understand is that we have to very carefully look at what we understand to be true because already some things that were said were not accurate. Okay, they're descriptions that overall appear to be accurate, but actually what genes do is they code for proteins. The proteins will then build structures. Those structures will then have for physical and psychological tendencies if it's an animal in order to do certain things. Those certain things under certain conditions will lead to the reproduction of the DNA molecule. Okay. So what you're looking at is a bunch of micro steps. In order, we find that the effects out here are an effect here that makes this thing more likely to survive, more likely to reproduce, will cause the frequencies of the genes that built it to be more numerous in subsequent generations than they would have otherwise been. Okay. So that's how that looks. So now we're going to try to back that down into to try to understand things a little bit better. So another thing that's useful to understand is that uh, the way nature works is the individual genes are building little tiny characteristics that will and altering characteristics that will result in they themselves winding up being more proliferate. Okay, so it's different than thinking the whole genotype is doing that. The whole genotype is not doing that at all. The whole genotype for an animal or a plant is building, it's not doing anything in concert. It's actually doing, each little gene is doing its little thing, and that little thing that that gene does winds up being something that has been useful for altering the physical or psychological architecture of in the evolutionary history of that species. There a little gene variation could come up that when it does whatever it does, it causes that organism to be actually less effective. Okay. And then that, in fact, when that does happen, when there's a new little alteration of something, 999 times out of 1,000, it will actually be deleterious to the organism's likelihood of that gene isn't going to be, it's not going to help that body do something that will actually increase that gene frequency's ability to be reproducing itself in the future. All right. So you could have a gene, we're going to call it, um, uh, we'll call it B, call it a B gene. And that gene, that will cause a change. It'll code a little protein differently and it will cause a change. And that change in the organism will do something to it, and it may be a good thing or it may be a bad thing. So let's suppose that if that gene is sitting in let's say that gene is sitting in a female, and she's got that gene, the B gene, and there's other genes. There's a K gene that is an alternative gene, but she's got a B gene in that slot. And it's going to turn out that that B gene increases estrogen levels. So she turns out she's got a lot of these B genes where most women have some K genes and some B genes and some F genes, but she's got a high proliferation of B genes. And those B genes are they're coding for a lot of estrogen. So she's highly estrogenized. Okay, so we see she's got really thick lips without Botox in there or whatever the hell it is that they stick in there. She's got very arched eyebrows because she's got the B genes code for these estrogenized characteristics. She's got a severe hourglass frame as opposed to a more athletic frame. She's got a high voice. In other words, when we look at her, we can see, Jesus, you're just full of estrogen. Okay. She likes to do girly things. Okay. So she is, on a range of how masculine versus feminine in this girl. She's in the 95th percentile for feminine characteristics. She's not very competitive. She's not really interested in doing battle or doing judo or soccer. She likes pretty things. She likes, she likes to do artsy little stuff. That's what she likes. She's an estrogen machine. Now, she now, if she's highly estrogenized, males will find her more attractive than an average estrogenized female, on all things being equal. The males are designed by nature to be looking for estrogen cues. Estrogen cues are evidence of, this fertility characteristics, whatever the hell it is. They are looking for estrogen cues. They want to make damn sure the thing that they're mating with is a female. So they're looking across the savannah. They can see the way that one walks, the way its curvature is. They can just even how athletic versus effeminate the walk is. They can go see from 300 yards away that's a female. Okay, and they are more motivated to approach rather than stay away as a result of this. When they meet her and they're talking to her, they can hear from the high voice, that's a female. So it's clearer that it's a female. All right. So she's got a bunch of B genes that are responsible for these characteristics. She didn't learn to be effeminate, for God's sakes. It was an innate characteristic built into her DNA. There is a bell curve of these characteristics in the female population, with the average female being the average amount of effeminateness, and a 99th percentile female being 99% effeminate. Okay. And a first percentile female being 1% effeminate. If we were to actually discover the underlying biological variances that are causing that difference, one of those things could be the B gene. Okay. There might be 1,000 such genes that are involved, and there are probably a hell of a lot of them. But the truth of the matter is, a bunch of the genes that would be involved with the facilitation of the manufacture of estrogen and its expression, those would be involved. Something is involved that is causing those variances. So our woman has a lot of those. And so it's no surprise that because she's highly attractive, she is able to actually attract mates that have resources more than the average mate. So all things being equal, the mate that she selects will either be more sexually attractive than the average choice that she could make, or it will be more resourceful than the average, or both. Her job is to select for both. So she selects, and as a result of selecting for either a better looking, more sexually attractive mate than average, or a more resourceful mate than average, either way, something's going to happen. Her children are going to have a boost of their sexual attractiveness, or they will have a boost in their likelihood of survival. Either way, there's been an advantage. Okay. But one of the things that comes along with that is that your children are likely to be carrying around more of the B genes. The B genes are going to be genes that code for estrogen and are more likely to estrogenize the child that is born. So it's going to turn out that if the child that's born is a female, we're going to expect it to be a highly estrogenized female that's likely to be more beautiful than the average female because its mother was, and therefore we wind up with a beautiful daughter. If it's in a boy, we're going to wind up with a boy that is more estrogenized than normal. And if it's more estrogenized than normal, it's going to turn out that in utero, in the development of the brain, the amount of sex hormones that are involved, that are circulating in the system, are going to influence the sexual psychology of the organism. and it's going to wind up left, right, or somewhere in the middle. It's going to wind up either the boy is going to be doused with androgens as it's in development, as are all boys doused with androgens. It's going to develop a male body, but the question is, in the development of its mind, will there have been enough estrogens to tip it over and actually wind up in its mate search image areas of the brain? Will it wind up with a mate search image that is in fact a female version of the mate search image? If it winds up with a female version of the mate search image, it will be gay and it will be attracted to the people that females would be attracted to. Okay. If it winds up with the male version, it may be a more effeminate than average male. It may be a male that likes to cook. It may be a male that doesn't like to fight and wrestle. So or it may wind up average, as we've just said in earlier discussion, that just the genes are only having these moderate effects. In other words, the offspring don't follow lockstep with what the parents are. They are biased towards the parents' genetics, but the correlation coefficients are 0.2 for IQ and for personality characteristics. So, however, if it were true that estrogenizing the brains or androgenizing the brains is influencing the sexual psychology of the organisms, which it does, then genes that would be responsible for, particularly out at the extremes, that would be more likely to highly androgenize or highly estrogenize brain tissue would be likely to throw homosexual individuals on either side of this bell curve. So you would expect then that if you could look for this rather than, since we don't know all the genes that would be involved, but we could look in an interesting place. And an interesting place to look would be if we looked at the sisters of gay men. We would expect that the sisters of gay men would be more sexually attractive than the sisters of straight men, because they should be, on average, getting an extra load of estrogen from their beautiful mothers. In other words, that if we are right that a hyperloading of estrogen and a high topping off of estrogen can sometimes cause a boy fetus to be tipped over to having a female mating search image, we would expect to find that would be true. That is true. That's is an empirically verified fact.
Wow.
Okay. So I expect that it is also true, but I have not seen it written, that it is possible that the brothers of lesbian females are more androgenized than the average male. More likely to swear, more likely to fight, bigger upper body development muscular-wise. In other words, it would be interesting, i.e. more conventionally handsome as a result of having greater degree of androgen cues. I don't know that anybody has done that research, but I would be surprised if that were not true. Okay. So I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not pretending like I know the answer. I'm just saying it would fit to me. Usually when we see things like this, we see things tend to be symmetrical in terms of how evolution is going to work on problems like this. So that's what I would expect to be true. So I don't know that is the only reason why this works this way. So I call it B because I would call it the beautiful gene. So a beautiful gene, something that makes we don't call men beautiful, we call women beautiful, call men handsome, okay? So a beautiful gene, a gene that causes beauty in women, would be a gene that would be involved in high production of estrogen, or a suite of genes that would be involved, a whole bunch of them. So we're not going to talk about one gene. Let's talk about 50. So if we talk about 50 genes and the average girl gets 25 estrogen genes out of there, but a very beautiful woman got 45. Okay. So now that lady now gives birth, those outlier genes are now being effectively diluted by her husband's genes. And so now we're going to find out, we're going to look at, we got kids now, but we're going to expect on average those kids are going to occasionally we're going to wind up with a kid that's going to have a high load of estrogen. You know, it's going to be a mishmash, but you're more likely to get a great racehorse out of a great stud than you are out of out of nobody. Okay, you're more likely to get Kobe Bryant out of Jelly Bean Bryant than some other guy on the street. So the you're more likely to get Steph Curry out of Del Curry. So what's going to happen is you're more likely to get a gay male out of a beautiful mom. Okay. You could also, there's no reason why these genes would have to be specifically sex typed. You could also be more likely to get a gay male out of an effeminate father. Okay. So he might not even evidence those characteristics in himself, but it could be down in his DNA, latent, sitting in some of his sperm that you haven't seen any evidence of the family gene pool for 2 generations, but it's in there. Okay. So this is the crapshoot of how it is that it goes on. And this is one explanation that may be responsible for part of what it is that we see. It isn't, quote, the explanation, but it's explaining the type of way that this would work. In other words, a given gene or type of genes could code for a characteristic that would be beneficial for survival and reproduction. For example, in siblings, for example, in a sister. Okay. But if it's in a brother, it's more likely it goes one direction one day. It's beneficial for reproduction in the sister. It makes her more likely to reproduce DNA, and therefore that DNA is more successful. So therefore that beautiful gene winds up being advantageous that direction. It winds up being disadvantageous when it occasionally winds up tipping a male into homosexuality, which will reduce his likelihood reproduction of his DNA. Okay. All that is a math problem with variant engineering that takes place as a result of it. And that's what we get. So that is the theoretical explanation of exactly why you have gay people in the world that aren't reproducing their DNA at the same level that heterosexual are reproducing their DNA. Okay, that is the reason why that could happen. So and can and would, and I don't know, there could be other explanations. You could have in theory, you could have a social learning explanation. I believe that all of those have failed, and I don't believe that there's any truth in any of it. So I don't believe that any trauma happens. I don't believe that any social learning happens. I believe that people are born with the sexual psychology that they have. And wherever they are on a spectrum of how it is that they operate, what they find attractive, what they're drawn to, what they find repulsive, all of those things I think are overwhelmingly innate to the organism. All right.
I love it.
Well, that's a mouthful for one day.
Yeah. Well, no, next time we'll go over the Middle East conflict. We'll talk about abortion, and then
let's just talk about everything controversial and upsetting. Yeah, why not? Yeah, I hope that that this discussion on all these things today is I hope people can, as much as possible, view these things as mechanical curiosities of the natural history of our species or any other species. In other words, this is how I see these things. I see I see the world and the history of life as a story of a bunch of accidents, unpredictable things, fluid and dynamics, the nature of the earth and its relationship to the sun, the oceans, the moon, all the happenstance that involves in what eventually gave birth to the DNA molecule, and then everything that has happened and transpired since that in the entire tree of life that exists today. So all of the little individual characteristics and variances in humanity and its psychology and all that kind of stuff, I see these through the lens of essentially microbiology and chemistry and physics and happenstance. There's no there's no fascination with any issue that gives rise to a bunch of human emotion about it. In other words, to me, I mean that's its own thing about the curiosities of this species and its fascination with these individual differences or processes. But for me, the curiosity is understanding what gave rise to these things, and I believe that what gives rise to it is effectively microbiology. Yep.
To me, it's how else is there to think about it? Yeah.
There would be other ways to look at it. If you were a social scientist in time in the 20th century, you would be abhorrent. You would find all this abhorrent. You would call me a Nazi. You would be incredibly upset about this. You'd be deeply offended, and you'd be ready to cancel me and bankrupt me and burn my house. Okay, you consider me evil. So that's where that has been. That's too bad. I understand it. I think that there's some interesting reasons in human evolution that would give rise to that. But I don't, I can't see these things from any other way, knowing what I now know about the mysteries of life.
Well, Dr. Lisle, thank you for enlightening us, and it's awesome. I love it, and
All right,
wouldn't have it
cool.
any other way.
All right. All right. Very good. I will see you again in a couple of weeks, Nathan.
Sounds good, Dr. Lisle. Thanks, everyone.
Gotcha. All good.
Bye-bye. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate everybody who likes, shares, comments, and subscribes. Let me know what you think about this episode and part one. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks for watching.